Today, I want to speak on a topic close to many of our hearts: why God sometimes separates us from people, places, or even our comfort zones. Often, this separation can feel like a loss or a time of confusion. But what if we looked at it as something deeper, as an invitation from God to grow, renew, and find a truer path? When we understand that God's plan involves sometimes moving us away from what we know, we start seeing the beauty in every phase. Sometimes God separates us from people, places, or situations because He sees potential in us that we have not yet realized. This process of separation for personal growth can feel painful, like something is being taken away from us. But it's essential for the evolution of our character, abilities, and understanding. When we're comfortable, we tend to remain in a state of predictability, repeating the same routines and maintaining the same mindsets. Growth, however, requires change, challenge, and sometimes discomfort, which are difficult to achieve when we're in familiar environments surrounded by people who reinforce our comfort zone. Imagine a seed planted in the soil. It has to break through the ground and rise up to grow fully into what it was meant to be. Similarly, when God separates us from our usual surroundings, He is giving us a chance to break through limitations and become more than we were. This separation provides the space we need to explore new aspects of ourselves, develop inner strength, and find out what we're capable of when we rely on our own abilities and faith. It's often in these times of separation that we uncover hidden talents, discover passions we weren't aware of, and build resilience that allows us to handle even greater challenges in the future. When we're removed from what we know, we're forced to stand on our own, make decisions independently, and develop our unique voice. Rather than viewing separation as a form of punishment or loss, we can see it as an opportunity to learn, grow, and expand in ways we wouldn't have if we had stayed in the same place or among the same people. God's act of separating us isn't to diminish us, but to help us become the fullest version of ourselves, equipped for the purpose He has set for our lives. Sometimes God separates us to draw us closer to Him. In the busyness of life, surrounded by relationships, responsibilities, and daily distractions, it's easy to let our connection to God become a lower priority. We may find ourselves relying on our own strength, leaning on people around us, or looking to external things for a sense of purpose and happiness. When we go through a period of separation, God is gently inviting us back to Himself, giving us the chance to reconnect with Him in a more profound and personal way. In these moments of solitude or distance, there's an opportunity to tune into His voice, to find a sense of peace that doesn't rely on external circumstances, and to remember that God is our ultimate source of strength, comfort, and guidance. Separation can become a sacred time where our faith is renewed and our spiritual roots grow deeper. We often discover in these periods that the things we once depended on cannot provide us with the kind of fulfillment that God can. Being drawn away from certain people or situations can help us become more intentional about seeking Him, allowing us to bring our worries, hopes, and uncertainties directly to Him. In our vulnerability, we find a deeper relationship with God that goes beyond routine prayer or worship. We learn to trust Him with our deepest concerns and to let Him lead us rather than depending on others or on worldly things. God sometimes needs us to be still and quiet, away from distractions, so that we can hear His guidance and understand the direction He's calling us to. By separating us, He lovingly creates space for us to realign our lives with His purpose, rediscovering that He is with us through every season and that His presence is our greatest blessing. There are times when God separates us because He wants to protect us. We might not see it at first. Sometimes we might even feel hurt or abandoned when certain relationships end or when we're distanced from familiar settings. But God, in His wisdom, knows what lies ahead and understands the dangers, challenges, or negative influences that might not be visible to us. When He moves us away from certain people, environments, or situations, it's often because He knows these things could harm us in ways we can't yet comprehend. Whether it's toxic relationships, unwholesome habits, or unhealthy environments, God's separation can be an act of mercy and care, shielding us from future pain or spiritual compromise. We may feel resistance, especially if we have attachments to the people or places God removes us from. But just as a parent might steer a child away from a harmful path, God's protective separations are rooted in love and a greater understanding of what's best for us. Sometimes it's hard to let go of friendships or groups that once felt like a safe place, even if they're beginning to hold us back or lead us in a direction that doesn't align with who we are meant to be. God sees the potential traps or distractions ahead, and His protective hand moves us toward a place where we can thrive rather than being pulled down by negative influences. In these times, trusting God's protection can be challenging but also incredibly freeing. When we look back, we often realize that the people or situations we were so attached to weren't allowing us to grow or were even causing us harm in subtle ways. God wants us to be surrounded by relationships and environments that nurture our spirit, build us up, and draw us closer to Him. Separation, in this case, is His way of clearing a path for us, placing us in a safer space where we're better able to receive His blessings and to flourish in the way He intended. This trust in His protection, even when it's hard to understand in the moment, strengthens our faith and allows us to recognize His hand actively working in our lives for our good. God sometimes separates us from familiar situations or people to refine our character. In life, we naturally gravitate towards comfort and predictability, often avoiding anything that challenges us to grow or change. Yet, growth doesn't usually happen in comfort zones. It requires the friction, discipline, and resilience that come from facing adversity and stepping into the unknown. When God removes certain people or situations from our lives, it can feel like a loss, but it's often His way of creating a setting where we can look inward, identify areas that need improvement, and become the person He knows we can be. In these periods of separation, God is not only helping us discover our strengths, but also showing us areas that need work, perhaps patience, humility, forgiveness, or perseverance. Relationships and situations can sometimes serve as mirrors that reveal things about ourselves that need refining. For example, if we struggle with dependency on others, separation might be a chance to build self-reliance and faith in God. If we tend to have difficulty controlling our reactions, separation can teach us patience and self-discipline. God uses this time to polish and shape us, much like a craftsman refining a rough stone into something beautiful and precious. The refining process can be uncomfortable, even painful, as it forces us to confront parts of ourselves we may prefer to ignore. We're often faced with situations that test our integrity, our strength, and our faith, pushing us to grow in ways we wouldn't have if everything stayed easy and predictable. However, every trial, every lonely moment, and every difficult decision is part of God's intentional work within us. Through this process, He is helping us develop qualities like resilience, empathy, and wisdom, qualities that make us stronger, kinder, and more grounded in faith. By removing us from situations or people that allow us to stay unchanged, God is giving us the gift of transformation, turning us into vessels that can better serve Him and fulfill the purpose He has for us. In the end, we emerge from this refining process as better, more mature versions of ourselves, ready to take on new challenges with a deeper sense of identity and purpose in God. Sometimes God separates us because He is preparing us for a new season in life. We may not always recognize it, but every stage of our lives has its purpose and lessons, and God knows when it's time to transition us into something new. Just like a gardener prunes a plant to encourage fresh growth, God sometimes removes us from certain people, places, or routines to get us ready for the next chapter of our journey. When He does this, He is often creating space for us to develop new skills, gain fresh perspectives, and build the strength and wisdom we'll need for what lies ahead. We may not fully understand it in the moment, but God has a specific purpose for each season, and He sees the bigger picture of how everything in our lives will come together. This preparation can feel lonely or unsettling, especially if we don't know exactly where we're headed. We may feel confused as we lose relationships or leave behind roles that once defined us. But these separations are not random. They're part of God's plan to equip us for what's coming. Each new season often requires something different from us, maybe more courage, more patience, or a more profound reliance on Him. The time of separation allows us to shed old habits or ways of thinking that won't serve us in the future. It's an opportunity to reset, realign, and start fresh, free from the attachments or mindsets that may have kept us from growing. During this preparation phase, God often places new dreams in our hearts, new skills within our reach, and new callings that require us to stretch ourselves in ways we haven't before. We might find ourselves drawn to learning something new, exploring a new passion, or developing qualities that once seemed unimportant. God uses this time to help us build resilience, adaptability, and a renewed sense of purpose. He's guiding us to become the kind of people who can not only handle the blessings of the next season, but who can also thrive and be a blessing to others. While it's natural to feel the weight of separation, especially when we're unsure of what's next, this time of preparation is His way of lovingly ensuring we're ready for what He has in store. As we go through this process, we learn to trust that God is in control and that His timing is perfect. He doesn't rush us into a new season unprepared or let us linger in old circumstances that no longer serve our growth. Instead, he orchestrates each detail, moving us forward when we're ready and setting us up for a future that aligns with his greater plan. So, while the separation might feel painful or confusing, it's a beautiful reminder that God is preparing us for a future filled with purpose, hope, and possibilities beyond what we can see. When we embrace this season of preparation, we allow God to work within us, shaping us to become all that we're meant to be for the journey ahead. Sometimes God separates us to remove distractions that may be preventing us from fully engaging with his purpose for our lives. In today's world, distractions are everywhere, whether it's social media, busy schedules, or even relationships that, while meaningful, can sometimes pull us away from what matters most. These distractions can cloud our vision, keep us overly focused on the opinions or expectations of others, or leave us constantly chasing temporary satisfactions instead of long-lasting peace and purpose. When God separates us, he is giving us a valuable chance to clear away the clutter in our minds and hearts, allowing us to focus more intently on what he is calling us to do. Separation can be God's way of simplifying our lives so that we can hear his voice more clearly. When we're constantly surrounded by noise, be it from people, media, or even our own anxieties, we can become disconnected from the guidance and inspiration God wants to give us. In a season of separation, we may find ourselves with fewer social interactions, fewer activities filling our time, and more opportunities to sit quietly and reflect. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if we're used to being busy, but it's often in the quiet that God speaks most profoundly. By removing certain distractions, he's inviting us to draw closer to him, to refocus on what truly brings fulfillment, and to cultivate a lifestyle that aligns more with his values and his vision for us. In this process, we begin to see that some of the things we once considered essential might not have been as important as we thought. Perhaps certain relationships were leading us to compromise on our beliefs, or certain habits were keeping us from reaching our potential. God's separation helps us recognize these things, guiding us to let go of whatever is hindering our growth. We start to understand the difference between what brings temporary satisfaction and what truly enriches our lives. This renewed focus allows us to invest more in our relationship with God, in developing our inner qualities, and in discovering our purpose more fully. We can approach life with a clearer perspective, understanding what's worth pursuing and what isn't. When we allow God to remove distractions, we experience a deeper sense of clarity and peace. Without the constant pull of unimportant concerns, we're able to devote more time to nurturing our spiritual life, our health, and our relationships in ways that are meaningful and fulfilling. God may introduce us to new practices such as meditation, study, or service that help us grow closer to him and understand his purpose for us in ways we couldn't have imagined before. This season of separation becomes a precious period of transformation where we become less swayed by the world around us and more centered in God's love and truth. This removal of distractions helps us to walk more confidently in God's purpose, knowing that our choices are rooted in his guidance rather than the noise around us. The clarity we gain during this time makes us more resilient, more intentional, and more aligned with the person God has called us to be. Although it may have felt isolating or challenging at first, separation from distractions ultimately frees us, giving us a renewed sense of purpose and a more profound connection to God's plans for our lives. Sometimes God separates us to realign our lives with his purpose, a purpose that we might not fully understand or recognize at the time. Life often has a way of pulling us in different directions, especially as we navigate the pressures and expectations of the world around us. We might find ourselves following paths that seem promising, pursuing certain relationships, jobs, or goals, yet over time, these paths may start to feel unfulfilling or even empty. We can become so immersed in what others want for us, or in what we think we should be doing, that we lose sight of the deeper calling God has placed within us. In these moments, separation can be God's way of stepping in to reset our lives and bring us back to the unique path he has laid out. This redirection can be difficult, especially if it means letting go of dreams we once held dear or relationships we thought were essential. We might struggle with confusion or disappointment, wondering why something that seemed right is suddenly slipping away. However, God, in his infinite wisdom, knows when our choices are leading us away from his best for us. He understands the gifts, passions, and callings he has placed within each of us, and he knows when we are veering off track. By separating us from certain people or places, he is not punishing us, but lovingly guiding us back toward a life that is aligned with his plan. In this season of separation, we may find ourselves questioning what we truly value and where our heart lies. We may start to realize that some of the things we were pursuing were actually more about pleasing others or meeting societal expectations than about honoring God's purpose for our lives. This reflection period helps us gain insight into who we are, free from external pressures, and gives us the courage to let go of the things that are not aligned with God's design for us. It's a time to reconnect with our true selves and our true calling, stripping away any false beliefs or attachments that have clouded our vision. Through this process, we often discover a renewed sense of direction and passion. The goals and ambitions that once felt so important may be replaced with a deeper desire to live a life that reflects God's love, compassion, and truth. We may begin to feel called to new pursuits, whether it's helping others, creating something meaningful, or simply being a source of support for those around us. God's purpose is always bigger and more fulfilling than anything we could plan on our own. And by aligning ourselves with His plan, we find a level of joy and satisfaction that we could never achieve in pursuits that aren't truly meant for us. As we let go of the old paths and embrace the new, we start to see how everything that seemed like a loss was, in fact, a gain. The separation that once felt painful becomes a doorway to a richer, more authentic life. We realize that God's plans for us are not only for our good, but also for the good of those we're meant to impact along the way. This alignment with His purpose fills us with a sense of peace and assurance, knowing that we're on the path He intended, one that reflects His love and leads us to a future filled with meaning, growth, and fulfillment. Through separation, God lovingly realigns our lives with His divine purpose, helping us to become the person we were always meant to be. Sometimes God separates us to strengthen our faith and trust in Him. When we're surrounded by supportive people, familiar places, or comfortable routines, it's natural to lean on those things for stability. But true faith isn't about relying on the visible, the predictable, or the safe. It's about trusting in God, even when we can't see where He's leading us. By separating us from what feels secure, God is teaching us to depend more on Him and less on the world around us. This separation becomes a journey of faith, where we're invited to place our confidence not in what's around us, but in who He is and His unchanging love. These seasons of separation can feel like stepping out into the unknown. We may lose people we once relied on, or find ourselves distanced from roles, places, or even communities that once grounded us. In these moments, it's easy to feel a sense of loss or anxiety as we realize we don't have all the answers or the stability we once did. But in this space, God is building a deeper, more resilient kind of trust within us. He's teaching us to rely on His presence and His promises, rather than on external assurances. As we navigate this uncertainty, we're reminded that even when everything around us shifts, God remains steady and unwavering. This process is often one of the greatest tests of our faith. Without familiar comforts, we learn to seek peace and security directly from God. Instead of turning to friends or routines for reassurance, we find ourselves praying more, leaning into Scripture, and trusting that God's plan is unfolding even when we can't see the whole picture. This deepening relationship with Him transforms our understanding of faith. It's no longer a passive belief in His existence, but an active trust in His goodness and sovereignty. We come to understand that true faith means walking forward with courage, even when we don't know what lies ahead, because we trust the one who holds the future. As we grow in this kind of trust, we start to experience a new kind of freedom. When our faith is rooted in God, we're no longer as shaken by life's uncertainties or setbacks. We gain a quiet confidence, knowing that we are held by a love that doesn't waver, no matter what changes around us. This confidence doesn't come from a naive belief that life will be easy, but from a profound assurance that we are never alone, even in the toughest moments. God uses these times to reveal His faithfulness to us in ways we might never experience in our comfort zones. Each step we take in trust draws us closer to Him, building a foundation of faith that can withstand life's storms. Looking back, we often find that these seasons of separation were where our faith grew the most. The challenges that once seemed insurmountable become testimonies of God's goodness, showing us that He was guiding and providing for us all along. The people or things we thought we couldn't live without become reminders that God alone is our true source of strength. With each experience, our faith matures, becoming less about circumstances and more about our relationship with Him. Through separation, God teaches us that He is enough, that His presence, guidance, and love are more than sufficient for every step of our journey. And in this deepened faith, we find a new strength, one that sustains us and draws us ever closer to the heart of God. Sometimes God separates us to help us rediscover our true identity, an identity rooted not in the world but in Him. In our daily lives, it's easy to get caught up in roles, expectations, and the perceptions of others. We often identify ourselves based on what we do, who we're with, or how we are seen, and this can subtly shape our sense of self in ways that might not be authentic or aligned with God's design for us. Over time, we might find that we're living a version of ourselves that pleases others but isn't truly who we are at our core. When God separates us, it's often His way of calling us back to a place where we can examine who we really are, beyond any labels, roles, or judgments, and reconnect with the identity He has given us. In this season of separation, we may experience a stripping away of the things that once defined us. We may step back from friendships, jobs, or commitments that were central to our identity. While this can feel like a loss, it's actually a powerful opportunity for transformation. God is gently removing the layers of societal expectations, personal pressures, and even self-imposed ideals that have clouded our understanding of who we truly are. This process can be challenging as it requires us to let go of things we once held tightly, but it also offers a unique freedom. In these moments, we are given space to explore who we are without external influences, to reflect on our values, passions, and dreams, and to see ourselves through God's eyes. Through this separation, we begin to hear His voice more clearly, speaking truths about who we are. In God's presence, we are reminded that our worth doesn't come from our achievements, our relationships, or our status, but from our inherent value as His beloved children. This new understanding allows us to let go of the need for validation from the world, finding our confidence in the unwavering acceptance and love of our Creator. As we deepen our relationship with God, we start to discover qualities within ourselves: compassion, resilience, creativity that are expressions of His image within us. We begin to understand that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, designed with purpose and intention. Rediscovering our identity in God also brings a new sense of purpose. When we're not chasing approval or striving to meet external expectations, we have the freedom to pursue the path God has uniquely crafted for us. Our goals and aspirations become less about what others think and more about honoring the gifts and passions He's placed within us. We feel a sense of authenticity and joy as we step into our calling, no longer limited by the roles or labels others have assigned us. We become more attuned to God's voice and His guidance, which leads us to a life of purpose, peace, and fulfillment that can only come from living in alignment with His design. Looking back, we often see that the separation we once feared was actually an act of love and mercy. It was God's way of removing the distractions, pressures, and false identities that kept us from fully embracing who He made us to be. We come to appreciate the quiet, reflective times where we were alone with Him, where we could rediscover ourselves and realign our lives with His vision for us. Through this process, we are transformed from the inside out, becoming individuals who are grounded in God's love and truth. We are no longer swayed by the opinions or expectations of others, for we know who we are in Him. This renewed identity becomes our foundation, empowering us to live confidently and authentically, fulfilling our unique purpose in the world as God intended. Sometimes God separates us to help us cultivate a deeper sense of gratitude and appreciation for what truly matters. In our fast-paced, often demanding world, it's easy to take things for granted. We become so accustomed to the people, opportunities, and blessings around us that we forget to pause and acknowledge the richness of what God has given us. Separation, while sometimes uncomfortable, can be a wake-up call away for God to reset our hearts and shift our focus back to the things that truly bring joy and fulfillment. In these moments of distance, we gain a fresh perspective, learning to appreciate the things we once overlooked or took for granted. When we're removed from certain people or situations, it forces us to reflect on what they really meant to us. We might have grown complacent or taken these relationships for granted, assuming they would always be there. But in the absence of these connections, we begin to realize their true value. Whether it's a family member, a close friend, or a job that once provided a sense of purpose, God's separation allows us to see the depth of these blessings and appreciate them in a way we might have overlooked. It's as if we are given the gift of clarity, where we can truly evaluate what was truly meaningful in our lives. At the same time, God's separation helps us focus on Him and the many blessings He provides that we often overlook. We might not realize how often we rely on external sources for comfort, affirmation, or fulfillment until they're no longer available. It's in these moments of separation that we often discover a deeper reliance on God, recognizing that He is the ultimate source of peace, joy, and contentment. When the distractions are removed, we are left with the pure, unshakable presence of God, which teaches us to find gratitude in every circumstance. We learn that true gratitude is not about the things we possess or the relationships we have, but about recognizing God's goodness in all situations. This time of reflection brings us closer to a spirit of thankfulness, teaching us to cherish what we have rather than focus on what we lack. We begin to see the everyday blessings, health, family, nature, simple moments of joy as gifts from God. In the stillness of separation, our hearts are softened and we become more attuned to the small but significant ways God is working in our lives. We realize that even in times of separation, God's love and provision are constant, and that itself is a reason to be grateful. Furthermore, God uses separation to teach us to value the present moment. It's easy to be caught up in future anxieties or past regrets, but separation helps us to reorient ourselves toward the present, to focus on what's in front of us rather than what we've lost or what we're waiting to gain. We begin to embrace the beauty of now, realizing that every moment is a gift. We start to value the simple, everyday experiences, whether it's a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, a walk in nature, or a meaningful conversation with a loved one, as blessings that are often overshadowed by our constant striving. In this way, God uses separation to realign our priorities. We start to recognize what's truly important in our relationship with Him, our health, the people we love, and the ability to be present in each moment. We begin to cherish these things more deeply, knowing that they are not to be taken for granted. As a result, we live with a greater sense of appreciation, understanding that life is precious and that every day is an opportunity to grow in gratitude and love. Looking back on seasons of separation, we often see that they were pivotal moments in our lives. They weren't just about losing something or someone, but about gaining a new perspective on what truly matters. We emerge from these times with a renewed heart of gratitude, learning to appreciate not just the big blessings, but also the everyday moments that make life beautiful. Through separation, God transforms our hearts, helping us live with a deeper sense of appreciation for His constant presence and the many gifts He gives, teaching us to be truly thankful for all that we have.